The opinions expressed are those of the host. The material is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute investment advice, and it is not intended as an endorsement for any specific investment. Visit CrestmontPW.com for more details.
You are listening to the Ascent with Crestmont Private Wealth. I'm Alec Walker here in the Boerne radio studio in Boerne, Texas. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more on current market events. Obviously, the news last month with the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates by 0.5% was the first time that the Fed has decided to cut rates since 2022. So wanted to talk a little bit on how this obviously has some impacts on what we're looking at and seeing from an investment and economic standpoint, and then tying it back a little bit more to how this may relate to a financial planning topic of discussion. So let's step back and kind of go back in time to when the Fed started raising rates. So in 2022, they began the rate hike cycle going from 0% to getting up to about 5.5% on the Fed funds rate. So this was about a 500% increase in interest rates. And the main objective on them doing this was to kind of cool off the overheating economy. Inflation was at multi-decade highs. The housing market was really booming. Prices were skyrocketing. People are making cash offers with no appraisal and just viewing the home online. Things were a little bit out of control. And so, one of their mandates is to kind of help control the monetary policy and keep price stability. And that's what they attempted to do by raising rates. It did cause some, volatility in the stock market in 2022. But what we've seen since that hike cycle began, we were just talking about this, Sam and myself, on a video that we're going to be releasing to clients reviewing Q3, is 4 key indicators have really slowed down quite significantly since they started raising rates. The manufacturing index has slowed. The housing starts have slowed significantly. Obviously, I think the housing market has been one of the highest areas that have been impacted by the rate hike. Consumer loans outstanding have decreased. This means consumers aren't taking on new debt for major purchases. So they're being a little bit more cautious with big spending. So that has slowed. And then the fourth level is that retail sales have slowed a little bit. Potentially what we're seeing right now, and since the Fed has made this cut of 50 basis points, 0.5%, the market has taken off a little bit since then. There is potential for the soft landing that they've been talking about to actually come to fruition. Yes, we did have, like I said, the S&P 500 was down nearly 25% in 2022, but technically avoided a recession. We did not see the major layoffs from businesses in many industries broadly. We did not see the unemployment rate spike. We saw a slight increase in that this summer, which is why the Fed got spurned to cut rates now. But there is a potential that they could achieve that soft landing that they targeted. You are listening to The Ascent with Crestmont Private Wealth. I'm Alec Walker. So where we sit right now with the Fed cutting rates is how this relates to our clients. Kind of one of the major topics is mortgage rates. So the past few years, we saw mortgage rates get up to almost 8%. They have come down quite significantly this year. They've pulled back a little bit further as the Fed has cut rates. But where they sit right now, looking at a key indicator of the historical spread between the 30-year mortgage rate and the 10-year Treasury yield. So the spread right now, or the difference between those two, is currently about 2.27%. This is going all the way back from today to 1970, is 2.27%. Historically, the average difference there is 1.75%, the difference between your 30-year mortgage and the 10-year Treasury. So Treasury rates have really come down in anticipation of the Fed not only making this rate cut, but making future rate cuts into 2025 and into 2026. So what this potentially is signaling to us is there's probably a little bit more room for downward movement on the mortgages. In what we're preparing with clients that may have bought a house within the last couple of years or are looking to buy a house, and maybe they've kind of like myself kind of been saying, hey, I've got a pretty low mortgage. I'm not really willing to make a jump from whatever it may be, 3 to 4% up to a 7% mortgage. there could be an opportunity to refinance that existing mortgage for folks or to re-enter the housing market there. And that, I think, will have some positive benefits on the economy. So we're going to be planning and discussing with clients to look for opportunities to refinance starting next year. For folks that have a mortgage rate over 6% or higher, we think there's a pretty good likelihood that we could see rates within the 5% range next year, starting to see that in some different areas depending on what mortgage bank you're looking at. Now, things to consider. Obviously, locking in a lower rate is going to significantly reduce your monthly payment. Some folks that were maybe forced to buy a home or first-time home buyers that were just tired of paying that exorbitant cost of renting, maybe they had to bite off a little bit more that they could chew to buy that first home, and that monthly payment is a little bit difficult. Locking in a lower rate might significantly reduce the monthly payments. Some folks may be looking to lock in a shorter term loan, maybe going from a 30-year to a 15-year mortgage. Some folks may have bought an adjustable rate mortgage. That was something that was pretty popular the last couple of years with higher interest rates, with the projection that those rates would go down. More people were actually willing to lock in or purchase an adjustable rate mortgage, knowing that they would have the option to then lock in a permanent mortgage at some point in the future. So switching from an adjustable to a permanent may make sense. Some folks may be able to access some more home equity and remove some PMI insurance, particularly for first-time home buyers. With housing prices the way that they've moved the last 3 to 4 years, they may not have been able to put down the traditional 20% to buy that first home. Depending on how much they've paid down, how much their home may have gone up in value, they may have enough equity in there to remove their mortgage insurance costs. Now, some potential cons to think about if you're considering a refinance. There are closing costs for a new loan to go through that underwriting process. So if you don't plan on staying at your current home for much longer, it may not make sense to refinance. You may be better off just looking for that next home and locking in the lower rate on that new home. But the second thing to consider there, and I actually did this when I refinanced back in 2021, is some mortgage companies or banks will allow you to roll those closing costs into the new mortgage so that you're not having to come out of pocket as much for those costs. This may make sense if you plan on staying in your home for quite a bit longer, and if you prioritize just getting the lowest monthly payment and maintaining some liquidity. If you prioritize having liquid assets, whether it's in your checking account or investment accounts, versus having that money go towards the closing costs on your loan, it may make sense to consider rolling those closing costs into the new mortgage. What we're seeing here with these lower interest rates, or what our hope is that this will bring some life back into the housing market. Like I said earlier, this was the area of the economy that I think was most stifled by the higher interest rates. Sellers, not having as many buyers unwilling to move to a new home. So we should hopefully see more activity here. The one potential area or risk that we still see, as I mentioned before, the housing starts have really slowed since the Fed started raising rates. And that supply-demand imbalance between supply of new homes or sales of existing homes versus buyers has been really out of whack the last few years. That's one of the things that has driven prices up. If we don't see the starts really increase to increase the supply, and the demand rushes back in from buyers who are excited about lower interest rates, there's a possibility that we could see those home prices really start to climb back up and potentially offset some of the savings that we're seeing with the lower interest rates out there. That's one thing to monitor. When we talk to clients and we're planning with clients, and when we have been planning with clients over the past few years, a house is one of the biggest purchases that you'll make in your lifetime. Outside of, funding your retirement, buying your home, whether it's your first, your second, your third, is going to be your largest purchase, is that to not be too swayed by what the interest rate is and focus more in on what is the payment, what is the impact of that cost to your month-to-month cash flow situation. Because we always go back to our financial plan and making sure we have emergency savings set aside for, if we were to get laid off from our job or have a slowdown at work, and then an investment account. as long as you can maintain the payment and you think it's reasonable from a cash flow perspective, don't be too swayed by the interest rate cost. Because, another thing to think about that we've talked with clients, when mortgage rates were 3%, well, your cash at the savings account or what you could get on a treasury bond was 0 to maybe 1.5%. So you kind of had a 2 to 3% spread on the difference between your cash earnings and safe bond earnings. Well, now when you look at how much you can earn from a money market account, a CD, those rates are coming down, though they are coming down. But folks that had bought a new home with a 6 to 7% mortgage the last couple of years, well, we've seen bond portfolios or bond performances over the last 12 months perform north of 7% on those total returns. And of course, the equity markets have done quite, even better than that as well. It's important to have a long-term perspective, knowing that you've got the flexibility to refinance that mortgage in the future, as long as that monthly payment is something that is suitable for your financial plan. You're listening to The Ascent with Crestmont Private Wealth. I'm Alec Walker. So we talked a bit today about interest rates, the impact that that's had on the market, the decline in mortgage rates, and looking for opportunities to refinance in 2025. If you've got any questions, please reach out to our team via info@crestmontpw.com to schedule a consultation. And just wanted to end on one thing off topic from the markets, something a little fun. On the first episode we had, I think it was episode 103, Sam and I talked a little bit about fine dining and shared my passion about cooking. So just kind of wanted to maybe throw in a new What's Cooking segment, what I've made recently. So this past weekend, my wife and I, we made some homemade dumplings. You may think of those gyoza or pot stickers. We went over to a friend's house once and he pulled some out of the freezer that they had homemade. And we're like, oh man, we've got to do that. So we went and picked up some little dumpling wrappers and mixed up some ground pork and cabbage and ginger and garlic and spent the afternoon stuffing, I think, 90 dumplings. We were able to freeze about half of them. I had a good amount to eat for dinner for a few nights. Fried them in a pan with a little steam and added a little chili oil sauce on there, and it was delicious. And even the kids liked them as well. So our daughter, who's 3, thought it was real fun. She thought it was like a big pasta that she got to eat. So if you have some questions about that dumpling recipe, I can send it over to you. So thank you for taking the time to listen today. This is The Ascent, brought to you by Crestmont Private Wealth. We have offices in Boerne, Texas and Houston, Texas, and you can find us at crestmontpw.com. Thank you.